Hi everyone, Elsie Spittle is joining us today. Elsie, please can you start by introducing yourself?
My name is Elsie Spittle. I live on Salt Spring Island. I've been married to my husband for 58 years now. And the depth and the length of our relationship is really based on this understanding of the three principles. I've become a consultant and a trainer around the world. And I love what I do and what I share, because I see how it takes us all to who we really are on the inside.
Thank you. Please can you begin by telling us about your personal experience of disability and illness?
My personal experience with disability started with my grandson by marriage, who had cerebral palsy. I met him when he was 14 years old. He lived to the beautiful age of 21. And what I observed in him was he was full of love. He was severely disabled. He was in a wheelchair, ultimately ended up in a group home because his medical needs couldn't be taken care of at home. And wherever he was and whoever he was with, I noticed how he responded to this deep feeling of love. There was a situation when they were over at our home for Christmas, and my son got stuck in the snow going down our driveway, and Chris was at the window watching his dad, and his mom was standing beside him and got very upset and worried and anxious. And Chris took that on. He absorbed that feeling of anxiety. And then when our son was safe and didn't slide into the ditch, Chris responded to the change in his mom's feeling as well, as she became comfortable and safe that her husband was okay. So did Chris. And I began to notice that more and more, how he responded to whatever feeling was around him. And the more his parents lived in love, the better Chris responded. Now, Chris couldn't speak. He couldn't eat. He had to be fed with a tube, liquids, but he loved life. He just loved life. And there were times where we took him into the mall and just would sit with him in the mall so he could observe people and all that. And he just lit up, enjoying life. And I saw so clearly that his disability wasn't standing in his way, that he was more than his body. So that was really my first in-depth experience with people that have disabilities. The second was with my husband, who had cancer probably a decade ago now, stage 4 bladder cancer. And it was so interesting because he came to this insight himself, where he realized he was more than his body. Once again, he realized he was more than his body, more so than I did. I was gripped by what was happening to his body and my thoughts of anxiety. What if this, what if that, and so on and so forth. And yet I saw Ken follow his doctor's instructions. I saw Ken listen to homeopathic medicine and friends that were very involved in nutrition and, other means of healing. He just was open in a way that I wasn't. Long story short, he had major surgery, and that helped a great deal. He had several minor surgeries, but through all of that, he lived life. Like, he didn't let the disease control him. He always knew he was more than the disease. and he was living from the inside out. The last example I want to share is my personal experience of seeing Sydney Banks go through his cancer as well. He knew that he had it several years before it became public knowledge, and let Ken and I know this. And I saw him go through again his treatments in the hospital. There was one time when I walked into his hospital room, and he had just received the very latest, very toxic treatment for his cancer. It was kind of like the last try. And his nurse said to me, look, when you go in, please just stay for a very short time because this has been really debilitating, this treatment. And when I went in, Sid was sitting on the side of his bed, busily typing away on his laptop. And I said to him, like his sister, although we were not family, he felt like my family. And I said to him, like his sister, Sid, you're supposed to be resting. And he turned to me and he held up his finger like, shh. And he carried on typing, and then he folded down his laptop screen and he turned to me and he said, my dear, he said, I am resting. He was working on his autobiography, his last book, yet to be published. And he said, I am resting. As I'm sharing what I've uncovered, this gift to the world, he said, that's my rest. And I've never forgotten that. Because once again, he rose above his body and the limitations of his body. And he was living in this spiritual essence that all of humanity has inside of them. I saw that carry on when he came home, and in a short while he was bedridden, and yet he was working with myself and a colleague who started the 3 Principles School here on Salt Spring. And there were times where we'd walk into his front room and he'd be laying on the sofa, stretched out and looking frail and tired, exhausted. And then when he would sit up to talk to my colleague and myself about his vision for the school, there would be this change that would come over him, like a visible change in his appearance and in what he was sharing with us, in the strength of his words. He would lose years off his age. He would be imbued again with the spiritual energy, this our essential nature that would come out and help him and change him physically. And then he would be able to share from that state inside of him his vision for the school. And then when he was finished, you could see him kind of get tired again, and he would stretch out on the sofa and rest his body. So I saw him honor his spiritual essence. And when his body was tired, I saw him honor his body. So I witnessed that we are more than our body, but I also witnessed how important it is to honor our body, because our body and our spiritual essence are one. And I'll never forget that.
Can you tell us your perspective on seeing a person's health rather than their diagnosis?
I had a great experience of looking beyond the diagnoses of various situations with the group that I worked with. And the day before I was asked to do this, I had lunch with my 2 hosts. And as we were having lunch, it came to me that I didn't want to talk about what was wrong. I wanted to talk beyond the disease. I wanted to talk beyond the diagnosis. I wanted to talk about love. I wanted to talk about our essential nature, the part of us that doesn't need fixing, that doesn't get sick, doesn't get ill, that is always vibrant, that is an alive essence within all of humanity. No matter if we're stretched out on a bed and have very little cognition left. And I've experienced that too with my mother-in-law, but that's another story. And as I spoke about our true nature that is indestructible, underneath sometimes the challenges and the clouds that seem to override our true nature, but in reality never overrides our true nature. Our true nature is always there, always available to guide, to comfort, to offer solace, to offer wisdom and solutions. It's not just a feel-good phrase. It's this essence within humanity is substantive. It's alive. How you can tell that is, as I mentioned, Chris, that I could see the visibility of his inner being on his face. When Sid was stretched out, tired and frail, when he came to talk about what's inside of humanity, that spiritual energy filled him, and he was young and vibrant again for a period of time until his body needed rest. When you see that, you're touched by it. Why are we touched by it? Because we all are that substance. No matter what, we all are that substance, and we can feel it to one degree or another. It's those moments when you experience that in your life that you know so clearly that there's so much more than our diagnosis or our limitations or our disabilities. And it's reaching beyond that as a parent, as a spouse, as a relative, talking to what's right in that individual rather than talking to what's so-called wrong. And that's what I would love if people only took that away from this conversation, from me doing my best to respond. It's to know that we have something within us that is indestructible and is always available to us as long as we are on this earth. Some of you may be new to this understanding, or when I use the phrase our essential nature or our true nature. And so I want to share a little bit with you what that means to me, and perhaps it will resonate for you as well. I had a lot of suicidal tendencies when I was in my early 20s. I married young and felt I was forced to marry because I had a child on the way. And so I was in deep depression. I knew nothing about true nature, although I had a very strong religious background. And consciousness was mentioned a lot in my religion, but it was consciousness about what we did wrong. And so I was very conscious of being unworthy. Had no idea that there was anything worthy inside of me, which I would say is our true nature, that there is something innate, something that we're all born with. I'd been brought up with the concept that we were born in sin. And then I met a man who had a profound experience of his true nature. And because I knew him before he had this profound experience, I witnessed the change in him as he uncovered his true nature, this powerful, insightful intelligence within all of us. I hated what he was saying because I felt it was all my fault. Whatever was wrong in my life was my personal fault. And so when he would say things like, it's just your thoughts, Elsie, you know, look at what's inside of you. Look at the beauty inside of you. I thought, there's no beauty, you know. And I remember saying to him, when he would say things like that, like, if you think life is a bowl of cherries, Sid, my life is a bowl of pits. That's how I saw it. So on one hand, I see the beauty of him uncovering his true nature, this wisdom, innate wisdom inside of him. I felt it. I like to be around his well-being, but don't talk to me about this nonsense, is how I felt. So the intellect and this innate well-being were fighting instead of being in harmony. Until one fine day, after a year and a half of extreme resistance, I had an insight in the midst of anger, in the midst of feeling I never want to see this man again. I had an insight. The insight was thought creates feeling. I'd never had an insight before. I didn't know what it was. But I knew that phrase, thought creates feeling, because it brought with it such a feeling of worthiness. For the first time in my life, I knew that was my true nature being revealed to me. It wasn't words. It wasn't what Sid was telling me. It was my own innate wisdom coming out, filling me with love, with forgiveness, with worthiness. That was my own individual experience of my own true nature.
I think it would be helpful if you can tell us how you see and describe a person's well-being and deeper feelings.
I hardly know where to begin with that, because it's so simple. I felt those deeper feelings when I had that first insight. And it was like I felt the feeling without understanding how it happened. I began to learn later on, much later on, that you can have an experience of well-being and don't even know where it comes from or how you're connected to it. I lived in deeper feelings for a long time before I realized that those deeper feelings were directly connected to my well-being and my true nature. I'll tell you, it was like 40 some years later when I was talking at a conference in Los Angeles, and I was talking about being mentored by mind being our true nature. Mind with uppercase M, that bigger part of us, that spiritual part of us. And I was sharing my first insight because there were so many new people in the audience who hadn't heard this story. And as I was sharing that first insight and my feeling of worthiness that came with that insight, it dawned on me in the moment that was my innate well-being. That was my innate mental health. I never knew that. I knew and felt the experience, but I hadn't connected the dots until all those years later. And you might think to yourself, wow, lady, are you ever a slow learner? Yes, yes, I am. I'm a slow learner, but a deep learner. And what I love about that is, first of all, that insight that I had 40 odd years ago, 46 years ago, still blossomed after all that time. And I finally connected the dots of well-being to the fact that all of humanity is born with innate well-being. And if you even just consider that that's possible and shift your orientation in your life to looking at what's right in your life rather than looking at what's wrong. I was brought up, as I mentioned earlier, to look at what was wrong in my life. I was consumed with what was wrong in my life. That's why I became so depressed and lost and would say to myself, is this all there is? I have a good husband. I have 2 wonderful children. We have a nice home. Is this all there is? Because I wasn't in touch with my innate well-being. I wasn't in touch with my true nature. I had no idea it was available to me. And yet, I recognized it in Sid when after he had his profound experience. Why? Because we all are born with innate well-being. And so even though we may cover it up with what's wrong in our life, we'll recognize it when someone else, we may meet someone else who knows nothing about these principles or about this innate mental health, but we're all drawn to love. Same as I would say to Sid, don't talk to me about this nonsense, but I wanted to be near him because I felt warmed by his unconditional well-being. My neighbors tell me this. They wonder, what do you do, Elsie? You're still working at the age of 75? You know, what do you do? I tell them very little, but they're drawn to the feeling of well-being, especially during this pandemic. They see Ken and I living in well-being and peace of mind, enjoying our quiet life, enjoying our lockdown. So you can have the experience of being drawn to well-being in others and even experiencing well-being in yourself from time to time and not necessarily know that it's coming from you, from within you. You may attribute it to, oh gosh, we're out for a lovely walk in nature. It's nature that's giving me my well-being. No, it's your well-being that is responding more fully, more deeply to nature.
And finally, Elsie, what do you think would be helpful for families living with disability or illness to know? So if you had one message to give those families, what would it be?
As a family, as a relative, as a spouse, if you have someone in your family that is disabled and you're really tied into the disability, let me suggest to you that you just consider there's something deeper. beyond the body. Just consider it. That's all I suggest. Because when you consider it, you're opening your mind to something new, something precious, something golden, something that is your birthright, something that is yours already. Look beyond the disability. Look to the love. I also had the privilege of working in a group home many years ago with young adults who were disabled mentally and physically. We worked with the staff. And as the staff began to consider there was something more in their clients and their patients than their limitations, it helped their patients. It helped their clients so that they were able to do better and move beyond some of the limitations. Some of those that couldn't hold a spoon, say, to feed themselves, would need to be fed, with the assistance of the staff, got better. Were able to lift it now and again. Physically, some things improved. Sometimes. I'm not saying all the time. I don't want to say it's a bed of roses. I want to be real. But it helped the staff see beyond the disabilities. It helped them free up their own capacity for well-being. And when it freed up their capacity for well-being and love, I don't know how to say this, it just intuitively released that same capacity in their patients. We saw that, we observed that, we worked with them for a year, and we could see pre and post that love draws out love. Anxiety breeds anxiety. Love breeds love. Why? Because we are love at our core. That's a fact. So I hope this has been helpful. And just open up to consider that this is possible. And see how that possibility grows. Because you already are well-being.